Welcome to Leadership Matters, a Vision to Results podcast series recorded by Leadership Consulting. My name's Glenn Price and I'm joined by my business partner and co-host again, Terry Reynolds. And this podcast series is designed to help leaders take their vision and deliver a result. Now, if you've been following along in the series, we've finished step one, which was set direction, and it had three rational components: vision, strategy, and alignment. We then hit our first set of emotional drivers in engage and excite, which were experience, believability, and desirability. And we're now working through the third step of enable and execute, another set of rational drivers. And we talked about structure in our last podcast, and we're about to talk about resources. Now, the really interesting thing, we say this inside the book: if you don't resource it, you don't believe it. I think you can tell what matters, Terry, in an organization by where the money, time, and people go. That's the proof test, right?
Yeah, look, I think leaders love declaring priorities. They say how important something actually is. It's come out in the strategy. They're going to focus on it. But at the end of the day, it comes down to how well it's resourced, both financial and people and all those types of things. And I think that really sends a very, very clear message that last year we did X or Y, and we're going to take resources from that because it's not a priority this year. And we're going to focus here and move those resources across.
You've said something really important there. Remember back in our strategy podcast, we talked about strategy is as much about saying no to stuff or stopping stuff than it is starting it. And if you don't say no, then every year when you set your priorities, no wonder organizations are under-resourced, that they're trying to do everything.
Well, what you end up seeing is this growing structure, what we talked about last time, around historical priorities. And the structure continues to grow and grow and grow and becomes completely outdated based on what you're trying to do this year.
Oh, look, I've even got one client in their new org structure. They've decided not to do a particular service, and that service has people attached to it and is currently running. And they were bold enough to go, that is not where our core competitive strength is. We're going to need to let those people go and focus back on the priorities. Now, they'll do that in the right way, but that's true strategic resourcing, right? When you've got a group of leaders, let's simplify it, a group of leaders sitting around at the exec table, and somebody goes, look, I know I've got an increase in headcount in my budget, but it would seem like, Terry, you've got the priority at the moment, you've got the momentum in your part of the business. You take my headcount, and at risk to my own team having to push for the next 6 months, I offer this headcount. That's true resources. Now, I'm using people as one example of resource, but resources could be time, money, tech. How many times do we see a change in strategy, even a change in organizational structure? But you and I both know when we hop in the car and we're driving home from the offsite, or the series of conversations that we've had around strategy, if they don't change their tech stack, there's no way that they're going to be able to take advantage of what that strategy is.
One of the podcasts earlier we talked about is around believability. What impact do you think it has on believability when the resourcing is not supporting what people are trying to do?
Typical leadership conference. So you've just heard about all of the priorities and the slogans and the marketing statements and little show and tells. And then somebody gets their hands on the budget, which tells you the truth. Where are you putting your big bang for buck and what's being resourced? So I guess that leads me to the resourcing truth test, right? Like, how do you know if something's genuinely a priority? From listening to you say, follow the resources, right? That's how you genuinely know it's a priority for the organization.
Well, look, I think yes, you need to follow the resourcing, the time, the focus, all of those types of things. If they're not there, it's not a priority, it's just a preference, right? And sometimes you'll see CEOs that will follow their preferences, but not put bang behind buck. And I see this in particularly in partnerships, where you're trying to get all the partners on board about a priority that you want people to spend money on, which is partner money. That is a really, really tough call to get everyone to agree to that.
Why do you think leaders do that then? So whether they're partners, equity partners, leaders of a private organization or a publicly listed organization, they tend to commit to the big goals, right? But then what you're saying is that they under-resource them. And there's an element there where I think some of the leaders I've worked with, they're hoping effort, like, come on, we'll get the right people on, like, get on the bus, we'll just give a lot of effort, and that will make up and fill the gap. I'm incredibly conscious that listeners to this podcast could be going, well, that's all right for you two to talk about, but I'm under-resourced to begin with. We're operating off the smell of an oily rag, right? So I don't think I've ever seen an organization perfectly resourced. But why do you think leaders then do these big priorities, these big goals, and then under-resource them? That seems like insanity to me.
Well, I think that, the real acid test in focusing on these things is around creating a level of tension. And I think that the tension for the leader often is uncomfortable. And that is that, prioritization always creates discomfort and makes trade-offs. People want to focus on the left and not the right. And there's going to be arguments around, no, I want resourcing here because I think that's more important. And I think when you think about our VTR model is that you look right at the top, and if all of that is not done right around, we use the language, or we have in the past, around must-win battles, where are your big bets, all of those types of things. If that's too broad, that strategy piece, then I think we've got problems.
I can't help but think often when, as you were speaking and you're talking about resource, I'm thinking back to people and money and tech, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm thinking about the broader organization. Do you think leadership itself is a resource? Because I found myself in a previous life, I spent a lot of time with the squeaky wheel, and I went, oh, thank God I don't need to worry about that country or that team because they've got good people, they're executing really well. And so my own time as a resource, my leadership resource, was given to where the challenges were, not necessarily those that were doing really well. And maybe that sent, in fact, not maybe, it definitely sent a message about where my priorities were.
Yeah, look, what you've said resonates with me around if you're sent to a country because we want to start an office in this country, but there's one of you that goes. Maybe what happens is that the support is not there. It's like, what we'll do is we'll dip our toe in, we'll try the market, we minimize the risk if it all goes awful, as opposed to going, do you know what we'll do is we'll do this properly. We'll send 2 or 3 or 4 people. We'll make sure that we set it up right. We'll give it every chance of success. Whereas that requires a bold decision by that leader or the CEO to go, I'm going to commit to this.
I do see that though, right? So if you think about, I don't know, opening up a new product line, opening up a new office, putting boots in the ground in a different country, et cetera, I think it's easier for leaders to start and resource those new initiatives because there's a level of energy there, right? We're doing something different. We're going to do this. And so everybody kind of gets with why resource is being put behind a new initiative. But what I don't see, back to this, what are you saying no to enable you to move forward? I don't see many leaders starving the ones that aren't working. It seems like they're hesitant to pull people out of that and reallocate that resource.
You can't do everything. And this is the thing. The reality is that, that sometimes if you are starting something new, it's not from a budget perspective, and I mean more financial and people, it's not about having to go to market, find some people, find the cash, etc. Maybe it is an internal reshuffle, and that's finding people with some capability to be able to redeploy them into focus areas for those new priorities for that coming year.
I understand under-resourcing for a period of time, right? Or maybe it needs to justify that initiative can make some progress before we go all in, right? I get that. But don't you think that chronic under-resourcing drives burnout? And then, what happens to the believability and desirability? You've now got me brought into the strategy. I'm believing in it. I want to do it. But I don't have the tools that enable me, or I don't have enough people to be able to execute on everything that you're asking me to do. I think that's directly connected to mental health and burnout issues.
Oh, without a doubt. I think that the expectation, and sometimes the people that are chosen for these types of things are probably pretty self-led. So actually the burnout becomes part of them letting themselves down because they have such high expectations of themselves. But actually the organizational expectations are so high that they were never going to achieve them in the first place.
Do you see AI tapping into that to try and reduce this level of burnout or be able to produce work faster with less?
Yeah, look, I think there's a real opportunity there. I think that, as long as there is some level of lead-up period, and I'm thinking about you and I being dumped into countries and make this work or whatever the case would be. Imagine if you had 3 or 4 months to get ready for it, and then you moved in, as opposed to from day one, the clock starts ticking. You need to produce enough to pay for yourself. You need, it's a green field. You don't know any clients. You're not building on the back of a cash cow that you've got in that particular country, etc. So I see a real opportunity for AI to help people set those types of things up and make maybe that, learn to earn ratio become a lot quicker.
I sort of struggle with when I have a client that says, hey, this seems under-resourced in this particular area. And you take a look and you start first with investment and then you look at people. And it is under-resourced with the capability and competence that they currently have, right? So you've changed your vision, you've changed your strategy, but you haven't changed the skill set of the people that you've got. And we'll talk about that in our next podcast on development. But I do think that AI can do the heavy computational lifting that enables us to remain human. Right?
Yeah, look, I think, yes, it can help. What my experience says is that at the end of the day, from a resourcing perspective, good people are just hard to find. We're all fighting for the same people, the best people.
The war for talent, right?
It's always there. And, if people will always say, well, we just don't have the best people in-house, so we'll go to market. And the problem is you're going to somebody in market that you really don't know a lot about, that they don't understand how the organisation works.
May not have the right DNA.
All of that. And that's a problem.
It's interesting, isn't it? Capital equipment, we would measure return on investment, right? Or a return on capital. I've yet to see an organisation that goes return on individual. Like you've got 2 leaders at the same grade or you've got 2 people at the same grade that are working for your customers. What's the return? Because success leaves clues, right? I also think that you're right. It's hard to find good people. What I would say, my experience globally is that good people know other good people. And so I think that there is when it comes to resourcing, yes, from the people element, try and create an environment, as we said before, you're a talent magnet, right? People want to come and work at your organization. 2, you can use technology intelligently, right? So that you're able here's the proof line for me. Never have I found that throwing people at a problem is the solution,
no.
Right? And so can we use technology to augment and amplify the impact of people so that it's not about throwing more people, it's about making sure, and I hate that I'm saying this, but work smart in terms of making sure that they get to the outcome faster. I think that's really important. But I don't think leaders track. They track equipment, they track technology, they track investment, but they don't track the return on people.
No, and it's sort of funny, isn't it? Because all of these things need to be supporting each other, and that is that, you can have all the right resourcing, but if the structure doesn't support the resourcing you've got, then there's a problem because people can't do what they need to do. This thing's getting in the way. It's pretty rare in organisations where somebody will come to you and go, I've got too many people. I need to give some people back. It's always, we're not hitting our number. We messed up on that process, whatever the case will be. It's because there's 2 FTE missing. That's the problem. We're short-staffed. We don't have good quality people. It's always blamed around that, always.
So you can see how critical resourcing is to making sure that we don't leave opportunity either for engagement or financial results on the table. And so here are some top tips for leaders on how you can resource execution intelligently. Step 1, align your resources to priorities, not personalities. And that goes just as much for people as it does for projects. Stop funding your favorites, fund what actually drives the result. And sometimes that will feel uncomfortable. And Terry, you, throughout this whole podcast series, you've talked about the requirement for courage. And I think that requires some leadership courage. Make the invisible visible. So track time, track focus, track capability as seriously as you do equipment and cash. They're all finite resources. Get really, really good at knowing where you're placing them and what the return is. 3, reallocate boldly. We would suggest the best clients that we work with are constantly asking on a quarterly basis, what are we still resourcing that no longer matters? And then being able to cut that. And then last of all, invest early in the execution infrastructure, right? So the fastest way, we believe, to kill momentum is to under-resource the systems and peoples that turn that strategy into action. You're going to have to make some calls about where you're placing your bets. If you had $100, where are you placing that in terms of your resources? We always end with a reflective punch. So in this podcast, we'd like to ask the question, what would your budget say about where your true priorities are? If people were to understand where you're placing the money and the cash, what would your budget say about your true priorities? Hope you're enjoying the podcast series and getting value. We look forward to talking to you on the next series.